Let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts.
Welcome to Opinions, and we're back in your ears once again. The beer is in the glass, and we're ready to go, aren't we, Martin?
We are indeed. And we appear to be doing an alcohol-free show again, Steve.
That's third time now?
Yeah, despite the fact that I said after the first time, I probably wouldn't even record with you again. So that, obviously, you're not a man of my word whatsoever on the alcohol-free market that we do.
No, but I think each time the quality and the availability of the beers has been taking a step up, hasn't it? Which I don't think either of us really anticipated that back in 2016 when we did the first alcohol-free show, did we?
Oh God, no. I mean, I was still in. I think we were both still impressed that there was variety outside a couple of standards, but I didn't see so many arriving and so many breweries who brew only low or no these days as well. I mean, I think that's been the big thing, hasn't it, Steve?
And yeah, so the beers that we're featuring tonight are from breweries that do very much specialise in either purely no alcohol beer or low and no. So we should probably get into the first of the beers we're going to be featuring this week. This is from a new brewery called Sheep in Wolf's Clothing, who do specialise in low and no, although they do have a couple of beers in their range that are normal ABV as well. But we are starting off tonight with Lager Day Saints, which is a 0.5% lager, which looks very tasty, looks very welcoming in the glass.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to hint at what it may or may not be at the moment. So should we dive in?
Let's do that. Cheers.
Cheers. Bit lemony.
Lemon, really crisp, really tight on the bubbles. So gives a really refreshing finish on the palate. Really easy to drink. You know what, mate? I'm going to say I would struggle to call that no alcohol if I was given that in a blind test. That is a really, really good lager.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that latter piece you just said there, especially when it's cold. Maybe if it warms up a bit, but then I don't think a lot of lagers improve as they warm up anyway, in my own opinion. Maybe that's because I'm programmed to drink them cold. I don't know. But the initial thought would be the same as you. There's nothing really leaping out at me to say, oh, hold on a second, it's a low or no beer. So no, I'm impressed with that. I mean, it's a 440 can, as you say, 0.5%. Had nice carbonation when it first came out of the glass. And I think the slightly lemony aroma, or very fresh citrus aroma, definitely helped it. It didn't have anything unpleasant about it at all.
No, it's got a very clean finish to it as well, which is something that I certainly like to look for in a lager, because I want it to do that. I want it to refresh my palate and then to almost invite me back in for the next sip.
Yeah, it's for me, I'm quite happy for a lager to have just a couple of moments after I finished it, cut off, I go back in again, which is how I would often treat a lager.
As I say, we are really grateful to Sheep in Wolf's Clothing, and I've got to remember to say it that way around, because that's a play on the on the normal phrase there, isn't
it?
Who sent us quite a selection of their beers, and what was interesting for me was apart from the one which I think was a 5.8% IPA, there were a couple at 2.5, and then the rest of them were 0.5. But the thing that was interesting to me was the range of styles that they have within that. So there's the lager, there's a I think there's a session IPA, there's a wheat beer, there's a black lager, a real diverse range of different styles of beer that they've tried.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, slight downside for me of having that mix of cans is that it's very hard to tell they're from the same brewery, to be honest, because of the way the branding is and the colouring.
Yeah.
So even though I know that we got sent this package, and I have personally put them on the beer shelf for the show. It's a really diverse range. And when I went to get them ready for the recording this evening, it was like I had to double check I had the right beers from the right brewery for the Sheep and Wolves clothing, because I don't feel like they've got a identity on their cans. Nothing, or not as obvious.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, there's no uniformity across their range, and I wonder whether that is intentional as well, because as far as I'm aware, they contract brew every beer that they've got in that current range has been contract brewed at a different brewery based on the expertise and the technical knowledge that the particular host brewery has for brewing a particular style. So I'm wondering if the branding is purposely reflectful of that as well.
I mean, it could be, and you know, for them and people who know, very good. But I just think for Joe Public, it would be a struggle to identify it on the beer shelf or in the beer fridge. That would I'd be the downside, and it's in quite stark contrast to the other couple of beers we'll have from another brewery.
So we're going to start off this week by talking about next year, actually, aren't we?
Well, of course, why wouldn't we?
And looking forward to the Summer Sesh in 2022, which we are now hopeful will 100% go ahead, because it would seem as though we're moving into better times, and these sorts of events can be thought about again. And while you and I were looking at the dates, we had the sudden realization that it falls on the weekend after the double bank holiday that we're getting at the end of May, beginning of June.
It's Queen's Platinum Jubilee or I can't remember exactly what it is, but there's a day for the Queen, and also they've brought the spring bank holiday, the late spring bank holiday, to the end of that week, haven't they, as well? Yeah. So I think the Thursday and the first Thursday and the first Friday of that week in June, which I think is also a half-term week for a lot of people, are bank holidays.
Yeah.
So what have we decided to do, Steve?
Well, I think we both had the same idea at the same time, didn't we? Because we were chatting backwards and forwards about it, and then literally at the same time we was like, well, we may as well do 2 days then. We may as well do 2 full days. So none of this messing around with Summer Sesh Eve. Let's actually have a crawl on the Friday and a crawl on the Saturday, because it kind of, in a way, it allows us to realise some of the other plans that maybe we tentatively had for the Friday evening, but we felt as though we might have been squeezing too much or rushing a bit too much. So yeah, basically we're going to do a full day on the Friday. We're going to do a nice, easy crawl. Not a lot of places, maybe just sort of like somewhere between 3 and 6. So by no means a lot of walking involved, but we're going to visit Sturchley, because we keep hearing urban myth about the Sturchley Beer Mile. So we're going to go and give that a try, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I think we should go and find out for ourselves, Steve. Find out if this is an urban myth or if it's a true legend, and find out for ourselves. And that would have been a bit of the Friday evening. And yes, I think we would have squeezed it a bit more, and then people coming into Birmingham have to get out there, that kind of stuff. You know, if we do the idea, and I say the idea because we know how these things have often ended up. The idea would be it's a bit more gently paced, spend a bit more time. Again, as usual, we'll say where we'll be, and people just turn up. But we know that not everyone will be able to spare the extra day or want to do an extra day in a hotel or something. So obviously, the main day is still going to be the Saturday. That is going to be Birmingham Summer Sesh 2022.
Absolutely, yeah. And we are still in the process of looking at what the plans might be and the places where we might want to visit, and whether there will be any need for us to be kind of booking in advance, bearing in mind we're anticipating having a fairly big group. But it's just for you, our listeners, if you wanted to get it in your diary and you wanted to start looking potentially at hotels, we're talking Friday the 3rd and Saturday the 4th of June 2022 for the 2 cruel days, and then obviously arriving and leaving as you see fit around that. But we will publish more details about that early on in 2022. Let's get the dreaded C word out of the way first, and then we can start talking about the summer sesh.
Agreed. But yeah, it's definitely something we'll look forward to doing, because it's been gutting that we had to cancel it twice so far. So I'm really looking forward to it. There's enough places to fill up both days, and we've got enough Midland contingent to help us with this process as well.
But that is a beer adventure for the future. Let's have a little look back at some of the recent beer adventures that you and I have been up to, mate. So what have you been doing recently?
Well, obviously it's been a little while since we've had our beer adventure discussion, especially, when we had such a great guest on last time in Johnny. The conversation flowed without you and I having to discuss our beery adventures. So we've got to go back in time a little bit on this one. So you look forward to June with the summer sesh. We're going to go back to the start of September. And the Essex Bottle Share made a proper full-on indoor return to the Ale House in Chelmsford. Unfortunately, you couldn't make it, Steve, that evening. And there was 1 or 2 others as well. But I think there was a dozen of us in the end, which was wonderful to have a dozen of us back, because there was a couple of people who never felt comfortable joining us on the Zoom calls we were doing to keep the bottle share going during the course of lockdowns. And it was wonderful. The Ale House had reserved our old table. The glasses were out. They had Jaipur on keg to start the proceedings off. So I was rolling. In fact, if people hadn't turned up, I just would have sat there drinking all the Jaipur anyway. So, it was like, oh, everyone's turned up. Damn. Right. Over to the bottle share bit. But no, it was brilliant. Back to the old school. We brought our bottles, we brought our cans. And I'm only going to give one beery highlight because you will know what this beer looks like exactly, Steve, because you were there when Clayton picked it up at Stone Berlin.
Oh, did he bring one of his huge magnums?
Oh, yes. He brought one of his Stone Brewing massive, was it 1.5 litre magnum?
Yeah.
They're big, heavy bottles, even when they're empty. So this was one of the groundbreaking collaborations, number 11, Midnight Four-Stroke Der Champions, which I've butchered most of that, just to be clear. And that was done with Mars Brown, who I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, and also with Avery Brewing Co. in Boulder, Colorado in the US. And it was it's essentially it was a Rausch beer, a big fuck off bottle of Rausch beer, which I'm sure that Mr. Johnson would have quite happily sat there drinking the whole 1.5 litres anyway. But it was really nice, and it was not only because Clayton turned up and just basically, and could have literally smashed everyone's bottles with that one, but it was my beer of the evening. It was just really nice. Everything was in balance. So there was a little bit of sweetness from some maple. There was a little bit of smoke, and I think it was actually, although it says a Rausch beer, for a few of us, we felt it was more like almost like a slightly smoked bock. But yeah, it was a really nice beer to share, and obviously, because there was 12 of us, some of our other pours were quite small, so we did actually get a bit more out of this one as well. I've been back in the city, back in the office. We've transitioned to a hybrid way of working, and plan is I've been roughly 2 days a week out of the 5. And one of my recent visits was a very, very pleasant day, and decided to take a bit of a wander at lunchtime. And although I couldn't end up where I wanted to, on the way back, decided to stop off at a couple of pubs in and around Smithfield Market. And basically, there's only about one beer missing from this list I'm about to say, Steve, and I'm sure you'll know which beer it is anyway. But the first pub had a proper job on cask. The second pub had Landlord on cask. And then I stopped off briefly. I wasn't going to stop off at the pub near work, but I looked in the window and they had Ghost Ship on. So pretty much that's, 3 out of probably what we were our top 5 cask beers. I mean, all I needed to do was stumble on a pint of cask dry pour, and I would have been in danger of not going back to the office at all. So that was nice, but it was nice to see the pubs in and around the city and around Smithfield, which is still sort of within the square mile or just off it. Having custom in there who weren't living nearby. There was evidently city workers in some of them, but also that all of them had some decent cask on, and all of it in decent nick as well. So that was really very pleasing for me to see as well. And it just means then, you've got a bit more variety in and around the city. And it just, again, felt like things were slowly taking a bit of a turn towards where it was before. So fingers crossed that continues. Lovely to see those pubs have made it through to this point as well.
If there's that much cask available, it's obviously a sign that people are returning to the pubs as well, because they're obviously getting through the volume that they need to get through without having to waste any, aren't they?
Yeah, because I know that the Globe near work in Moorgate, when the city started reopening, they essentially had the Nicholson's Pale Ale, which is the one brewed for them from St Austell and Doom, and that was advertised in pretty much all the pubs. I suspect they didn't have as many casks as pubs, but they were just making sure it looked like they didn't have just deadlines and stuff. So, but as more people have come back, the variety has started to widen again. So what I have to admit is that none of the pubs that sell cask around work, the ones I went to, had anything from like what I would class as smaller independent brewers. These tended to be the family regionals, but they're getting them in from. But for my own personal taste on that occasion, it was actually something I was very happy about as well. But yeah, you're quite right. There's obviously enough people coming in drinking it, so that's good. Now I'm down to the southwest. So I've gone to the city. I'm down in the southwest now because I've taken Michael back to university, and dumped him and his stuff out of his car at his new accommodation, up to the Premier Inn, back into Plymouth, found somewhere to watch football, and then drank many pints of Tribute, as I do. Tribute tends to be in so many pubs in and around Plymouth, because obviously it's a slightly more sessionable ABV than having pints of Proper Job. So it's always easier I always find it easier to get hold of Tribute in Plymouth than Proper Job. I did find Proper Job, so I managed to do that. Maybe much to your disgust, Steve, I indulged myself in a few very nice chilled ciders as well. Sheppey's and Sanford were the ciders that I had. A couple of bars there selling them on draft, very nice they were too. And Harbour, don't often see Harbour on tap in our neck of the woods. But I found this little place called Stable overlooking the marina, which incidentally did fabulous pizza and mac and cheese. I had 2 meals in there during the course of one day, which we'd split it up by going to the cinema. So if you're in the Plymouth area and you fancy a bit of decent grub and a bit of a view, the Stable just around the marina is an excellent place to go. And again, good range of beers, good range of ciders. On the way home, decided to go to Southampton. A mate of mine lives on the Isle of Wight, so it's a handy place to meet, and it broke up the very long, dull, boring 7-hour journey home from Plymouth. And obviously not content with already arranging where we were going to meet, I decided, I've got an hour. I must be able to do something with an hour. So I found a little Belgian bar. Lovely little place called Belgium and Blues. And nice selection on. Only opened at 4:00 anyway, at least on the Tuesday I was there. I think it opens earlier as you get closer to the weekend. But yeah, lovely little place. It's all that generally a lot of it is downstairs, and there's some outside seating. Good selection on tap. Excellent selection in fridges. And when they were doing their food nights, they tended to be leaning towards some of the Belgian cuisine. So there was, you could get some mussels and frites if you wanted to as well. So I managed to find in the hour I was there, Bruzot, Saison de Pompe, and they had Burning Sky Blanche as well. So
not a bad selection to happen across, is it?
Exactly. And the sort of beers you'd quite like having that smaller pour as well. None of those you really need to have the bigger pours. And like all good Belgian bars, they had a good range of glassware to accompany the beers as well. So credit where credit's due on that one. Nice little find. And next time I'm in Southampton, I might be spending a little bit more time there as well. So I shall alter my timings when I'm meeting my mate. But we did meet up. We met up at Dancing Man Brew Pub, which is opposite the Red Funnel Ferries, for anyone who's familiar with Southampton. Lovely outside seating there, but they've got nice pub inside. Tends to be basically their own beers that they sell. Although, having said that, the aforementioned Burning Sky, they had Plateau on cask. 3.5%. I've already had a few Belgian beers, and I had the Blanche wheat beer, which was only 4.5%. Stepped down to the 3.5 Plateau on cask. Nice little starter. Dancing Man tend to specialise more in keg beers, but they've got a quite decent range. I mean, they've got some pale ale, some New England IPAs, a couple of variations on IPA between a 5.7 and a higher one in the 6 area. A nice milk stout as well. I suppose the highlight one for me was Poleaxed, proper West Coast IPA, 6.7%. Fortunately, my hotel weren't too far away, so that was a good thing. And we were there for a good while. But yeah, lovely pub, well worth a visit if you're in Southampton. And if you get the weather, sitting out the front, sort of overlooking where the ferries go for the Red Funnel, it could be a very nice atmosphere down there as well. So, Steve, I'm going to take a breather. I'm going to dive back into this beer. What have you been up to, mate?
So since the last time we spoke about beer adventures, I've had my birthday. So as you do, I treated myself to some beers from the cellar and some that were in the fridge. Quite a few, obviously, because it was my birthday and I was intending on celebrating it. But there's just a couple of standouts that I really wanted to mention. First of which was continuing with the Abbeydale theme. They've just recently released Deliverance Double IPA, which was continuously hopped for 100 minutes. So they basically took the concept that Dogfish Head have for their IPAs, and they attacked this brew. Every minute for 100 minutes, it got another hop addition, and the resulting beer is nothing short of marvelous. It's in terms of the resiny bitterness that shines through on it. It's absolutely fantastic. I know you've got a few cans, mate. I'm not sure if you've managed to get around to trying it yet.
No, I have dived in on it, and I couldn't agree with you more. It put me in mind of Dogfish Head beer as well, which I'm saying that as a compliment from my point of view. And we say it a lot, even despite all that pine and resinous and maybe even a little bit of dankness, it was superbly easy to drink.
Yeah, that's too easy. And then the other standout beer was last year's Fuller's Vintage, so the 2020 edition. Treated myself to a bottle of that on my birthday, and I really enjoyed it last year when it first came out. I thought it had a lot of potential, and sort of 9 months in, it's developing lovely. So I'm really looking forward to when we revisit that again on our end of year show this year, because I think another 3 months and that is going to be tasting absolutely sublime in the bottle. They've done really well with last year's brew of the vintage.
Excellent. Look forward to that then.
In addition to that, the only other thing that I've really done was this past weekend. Em and I went to Southwold for the weekend. It's a place that we absolutely love to visit. I can't understand why. There must be some sort of attraction there that draws us back time after time. And we essentially spent I'd say 90% of our weekend in the Soul Bay Inn, just enjoying the beers that were in there. We did manage to catch up with Sean O'Reilly at Uncruder, who came over and had a couple of pints of his Ghost Ship Shandies, as he calls them, the regular and the 0.5. So it was nice to catch up with Sean and just sort of like, just have a few beers really in the sun on Saturday afternoon. And then mostly on Sunday, like I say, we were in the Soul Bay Inn. There was a lot of Ghost Ship consumed, but also a couple of beers that and I think I mentioned this on Untapped, there's a couple of beers in the Adnams range which I think sometimes get overlooked because they're just simply not as widely available on draft. And that's the first one is their Ease Up IPA, which is a 4.6% session IPA, which I absolutely love. I think it's got such fantastic tropical notes, and it's just really, really easy to drink. And like I say, I think it's a shame that you don't see it a lot on draft. And the other one is Innovation, which is their 6.7% IPA, which is actually quite it's quite Belgian-y in its characteristics. It's like particularly yeast wise, it's got those some hints of those Belgian-y esters. But I was talking to Fergus because Fergus came over to say hi yesterday as well, and had a couple of pints with Fergus, and he was saying, yeah, they've been with Innovation in particular. Dan, who's the head brewer now, has been working on it to really dial up the citrusy notes of it and how that punches within the beer. And for me, I've never tasted Innovation as good as it tasted this weekend. It was tasting big and bold, and just that subtle Belgianiness that sat underneath it just brings that all together perfectly. So it's an absolutely delicious beer. But as I said, I drank loads of Ghost Ship, which is kind of what you do and anyway when you go to Adnams country. But partly the reason behind at least one of those pints of Ghost Ship was because I've now I'm officially into my 50th year. I'm finally starting this much lauded 50 beers for 50 years project that I've been banging on about for ages. And I thought to myself, what a better way to start that journey than to have Adnams Ghost Ship on cask in Southwold, because it was one of the very early introductions I had to good beer, really, when it was launched at the GBBF, and I tried it there. I was like, wow, okay, this is a really tasty beer. This is a cask beer that I could really get on with. So it felt like that was the appropriate starting point for me on my journey, and I've been able to already tick off line 1 on my spreadsheet, and start off with beer number 1 of my 50 beers for 50 years journey.
Excellent. Not a bad way to start the journey, mate.
I'm going to mention my little project because what I want to try and do is, wherever possible, is to kind of intertwine it into the show, because obviously the podcast itself has been a massive part of my beer journey over the last 10 years, or coming up to 10 years now. So it will be a case of, wherever possible, there are a number of dates over the next year that coincide with things we've done on the show. So I've already kind of earmarked beers for those dates, so that you know there's a little bit of linking back and looking back and over some things we've done, but the rest of the beers are all in a little tankard at the moment. They're all on little pieces of paper in this tankard, because obviously they were on a spreadsheet and I was able to cut them out. So I'm actually going to live on the show now draw out what's going to be beer number 2 of my 50 beers.
This is quite exciting. Years. I knew nothing of this.
I don't know. Love a bit of excitement. So beer number 2, which I'll be enjoying in the next week or so, will be, oh my God, this is really tiny. I can barely read it. I believe this might have been a bottle that you gave me. Will be one of the Courage Russian Imperial Stout from 2012.
That probably is me.
Yeah, that were available from Tesco's at a ridiculous price a number of years ago.
Like £1 a bottle, and everyone swept the shelves.
Yeah, so that's going to be beer number 2 on my journey, and it's actually a beer I've never had before either. So really looking forward to giving that one a try, which is really the complete opposite of what we're drinking tonight, isn't it?
Well,
yes. Great big double figure Imperial Stout versus alcohol-free beers. Again, I've finished the Lager Day Saints. I really enjoyed it. I found it maybe a little bit gassy towards the end. maybe 440 is quite a lot. In the summer, I'm guessing you could probably smash through that quite quickly on a much warmer day, at a barbecue or something like that. But it was enjoyable enough, and I've got to say, it didn't have any of those indicators that it was alcohol free. Really,
No, I mean, mine had a brief pause while I was doing my beer adventures, and even when I came back to it, it didn't start to give any of those indicators. I mean, sometimes it almost feels like off flavors or off notes, but it's not. It's just the way the beer is and some of the characteristics that come through. I would suggest, Dave, I know as a punter, when I'm taking a chance on a new alcohol-free beer, I'll probably prefer 330s, because again, they're the sort of thing like having a few in the fridge, and 330s obviously sit much more comfortably in the door than a 440 a lot of the time. So yes, but I also agree. I think hotter weather, hot day, and if that is the thing that you are deciding you're going to have, whether that be preference, health reasons, you're driving, running the next day, whatever it might be, I think you would have a good time with that one. I think it's a good lager. I mean, don't forget about the alcohol or such as it wasn't. It's a good lager.
It's really just a good lager. Yeah, it's a really, really good lager. Yeah, great stuff there from Sheep and Wolves Clothing. Now, you said about you'd rather have 330s. Can I entice you with a 355 can?
Oh, yes, you can indeed. So we have got some beers from Athletic Brewing. This is the Upside Dawn alcohol-free golden ale.
These folks are in the States. They got in touch, said, would you like to try some of our alcohol-free beers? I think they've very much got a ethos of athletics and health and fitness behind them, because the cans talk a lot about the nutritional side of what's in them. They're low carb, they're low calories, they're alcohol free. So they've really gone kind of all in on this being a beer to enjoy after exercise, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, mentioning the branding is very distinct on the front. And I think we'll be able to say the same when we have the second can later on as well. But I haven't tried it, so probably best we dive in and find out what we like about it or not.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. Fruity and refreshing.
There's a bit of tangerine, orange pithiness on the nose. It is as you say, it's very fruity, very refreshing. It's almost like drinking orange squash.
Yeah, a very light, diluted version. Carbonation is actually really nice as well, which I think helps with that refreshing hit or cut through. If you've been out for a run or maybe out cycling. I have to admit, maybe it's because I had a English golden ale in my head. It wasn't what I was expecting. And I personally, I don't often see the terminology golden ale used in US terms. Whether that's for here, I don't know. But it sort of caught me out. Effectively, it sort of drinks like a session pale ale. It's
again just really easy to drink, really refreshing.
Yeah, and going back to how you sort of introed the bit on the show, Steve, these are miles away from what we tasted in 2016.
Oh, aren't they just?
A million miles away. The first two, they just taste like beer.
Yeah.
I'm
almost speechless, which, doesn't happen very often. It has to be said.
Well, in this next section of the show, it may not happen at all, because while we are supping this one, there is one big beery adventure that you and I still need to get out of our system, Steve.
Yeah, we should probably talk about our beer then, really, yes, shouldn't we? Our beer, Red Danson, the collab that we made with Brew York and Elusive, has been released into the wild now. I think shortly after the show at the beginning of September where we first spoke about it. Some people who went to the Leeds International Beer Festival got a bit of a preview of it as it had its kind of first pour up there. But then in the last week or so, the cans have been making their way out into the wild. I know the beer's been on at the Brew York Beer Hall as well. But we had our very own launch event. Thanks to Rich and Sheena and Andy at the Vic, we were able to put on Red Dancing at the Vic. We had it on cask and keg alongside a whole host of other Brew York beers. And Lee came down and joined us from Brew York as well for what ended up being what I can only describe as a fantastic evening, although my memory of large parts of it is very, very hazy still.
Yes. The overriding feeling I had when I woke up Friday morning was twofold. One, I drank a lot. Two, it was a fantastic evening. It was, firstly, I'm going to echo that. Thanks to the Vic for putting the beers on, because by the kickoff of the evening, all 5 of the cask lines were turned over to Brew York, and the 3 craft keg lines were Brew York, and one of the keg lines was also Big Eagle as well.
Yeah.
So you could ask yourselves, where did it all go wrong when we're drinking a 7.2% and stepping down to the Big Eagle? And also, not only that, Lee turned up with a gift for us, Steve, as well. And I want to say thanks again to Lee. He came down all the way down to us, even though he had to get set off fairly early on the Friday. And he brought us the framed artwork that adorns the cans and the clips, which is wonderful. And it just, it's spectacular. I mean, it's got rid of that whole thing of do I need to keep hold of a can? I don't. It's framed forevermore. So Lee, thank you for coming down. Thank you for bringing that with us. And he was doing a bit of circulating around the pub as well, chatting to people. There was Rich said there was a table of 10 who had booked up, not for us, Steve, but because it was a Brew York tap takeover.
Yeah. They've been doing the online Brew York events during lockdown, and when they heard that there was going to be a Brew York can't even. Are you sure these beers are alcohol free? A Brew York tap takeover. They booked because they wanted to come down and try the beers, and then they got the added bonus of Lee being there as well.
It was a busy evening.
Very busy.
I know you went back. I know you went back in the next day, and they the 3.7 Karma Chameleon had already kicked by mid-afternoon on the Friday, hadn't it?
Yep. Just as I got back to the Vic just after opening on Friday, which I don't know why I felt the need to go back quite so soon after the Thursday night. But yeah, literally the Karma Chameleon kicked as I was waiting to be served, which isn't bad to have gone through a complete cask of beer in less than 24 hours.
Well, not when you think about how many other beers were still on and being sold as well. Because I mean, I had that early on because I thought go sensible early. I had a pint of it This Way Tony, the American Pale Ale. And then it was the big reveal after much deliberation about whether it should be without a sparkler, with a sparkler, or with one of those really tight sparklers or creamers.
Mm-hmm.
And, we did a proper test, me, you and Lee. Rich disagreed with our choices, but we ended up with, which can only be described as a Northern sparkler, essentially the creamer. I got to pour my pint of cask, and it was wonderful on cask. In fact, it was probably slightly different beer.
Yeah,
on cask. It was, and I know that the dispense can alter it a little bit, but it was softer. It was rounder, more rounded. Very, very easy to drink on cask, and definitely hit the 7.2%. You poured the keg version, so that was the first pour, the keg version, and for me, the keg version is almost spot on our vision of what we wanted the beer to be,
mm-hmm.
which is sharp, bitter, piney, that malty backbone, essentially an old school hoppy red ale. And I think you get all of that from that one. And that one doesn't sort of hide the ABV quite so well. I think it sort of tells you it's a bigger beer. And it's closer, probably not surprisingly, but closer to the canned version. But I think that sort of nailed the vision we were after, was that version of it. But it was just a superb evening. And then it just got all a bit jumbled up. There was just beers being passed over and bought, and pints of Big Eagle being drunk in between pints of Red Danson. It's no wonder there's the odd gap here and there.
I think my issue is more slightly that once the Red Danson started pouring, that's all I drank. I didn't get round to drinking Big Eagle on Thursday night. That's
did
why,
you not?
No, that's why I ended up going back on Friday, because I wanted Big Eagle, and also because I wanted to have the 2 pints of Red Danson while I was sober, so I could actually make some tasting notes, so I could remember what it tasted like. But yeah, I have to agree. It's going to probably sound strange coming from me. I think I actually preferred the cask version of it. It was just so full of flavour, but at the same time, so easy to drink and very dangerous on cask as well at that 7.2%. Really didn't feel it at all. And actually, when I went back on the Friday, they'd taken the creamer off and they'd put the sparkler back on, because there was a different barman on, and so Alex was on, and he said, I think it's served better through a sparkler, so I put the sparkler on, and it did. From the slight recollection that I had on Thursday night, it did taste slightly different. It brought a lot more of the fruity notes out. The softness was still there on the finish, which I think, as you rightly say, with the keg version of it, the bitterness on the finish is exactly what we were looking for in that beer. It's big, it's bold, it's not messing around, and it just slaps you around the face and then instantly makes you want more of it.
Yeah, completely agree. Interesting about Alex went down a slightly different route with the Spence. I wouldn't have minded trying that the second time myself. But you know, the whole listeners will be glad to hear that this is our rounding off of this particular adventure anyway.
Yeah, we're not going to keep banging on about how great Red Danson is.
Yeah, but and also I have noted a few listeners have tried it and seem to have enjoyed it as well. So really appreciate that feedback we've had as well. But again, we can only thank Lee and Andy for letting us be part of the experience, being part of the brew day, and then being allowed to make a really big song and dance about the whole thing as well. So, you know, if everyone drinks enough of it and buys enough of it, maybe it'll become a seasonal release. So
I think we're that's where our campaigning starts here. We know Lee listens, and we know we said this to him on Thursday, but the campaign starts here, Lee, that Red Danson becomes an annual release.
And, you know, we're more than happy to do your share of the work on the daily and throw hops in.
and I think we may have ambitions as well in a couple of years for an imperial version as well, don't we? Because you need it bigger than 7.2%.
Well, it lends itself, doesn't it? That sort of you could definitely imp it up, so to speak. So again, everyone, anyone who listens and who also joined us, and we know that Paul, you and RCD made the trek across for us as well. Wonderful night. For those people that I spoke to but completely forgot about it, apologies. But my overriding sense that night was just one of absolute enjoyment and feeling like I was smiling the whole night through.
Yeah, same here. It was a wonderful evening. It was great to see so many people, and much like yourself, if I spoke to people and completely forgot that I spoke to you about anything, I am sorry, but the beer was just tasting too good. I do just want to extend a thank you as well to all of our listeners that have gone out and bought cans and tried it as well, and given us some feedback via Twitter on the beer. That's been fantastic to see you all enjoying it, and also it's been very interesting to go down that brewers journey of kind of watching people check it in on Untapped and then going, what do you mean it's only 3.5? It's seeing some of the Untapped check-ins has been quite eye-opening as to when you hear brewers say about how obsessed they become with Untapped, you can see how easy that is to do, because I don't know about you, mate, but since it's been released, I've been like a demon on there on Untapped, looking at what other people have been saying about our beer.
I've done it less. I definitely did it at the Leeds International Beer Festival day, because that was the first day it was out in the wild, and I just really wanted to see pictures of how it looked and the initial reaction to it, because we'd already had Lee's theme, but I wanted people who had no connection to it. But yeah, I can definitely see it. I mean, what I think I found, and I reckon you and I have both been guilty of this, you read some of the comments and you think, oh, they really enjoyed it. 3. And I'm thinking, you're like the fucking Strictly Come Dancing judges. You give all these compliments, then you give a 4 when it comes to scoring. So come on. But it just shows how subjective it is to people, isn't it? Both their own personal scoring system and the comments and stuff. I've enjoyed it, but then I've only had to really focus on the one beer that I've ever been involved in brewing. So
yeah,
I would hate to have to be wanting to go down the rabbit hole when there's multiple ones, or maybe you're a new brewery and you want to know what's the initial feedback like. So I can definitely see why people could get a little sucked into it and then go, no, it's not for me. I'm never looking at it again and stuff. But I just can't get over seeing the artwork every time, so I'm quite happy to go into Untapped.
Yeah, I love the artwork, and again, just to echo what you said, it really grateful to Lee for framing that up for us and giving us one of those each. I'm just really grateful to everybody that's been involved in it, really, whether that be Lee or Andy or Rich or Sheena or Andy or every single person that came down on Thursday night. It's been a fantastic journey, and it's been a real marker in the sand as far as my beer journey goes as well.
Yeah, agreed. And that's it, folks, as the cartoon used to say.
Yes, that is the last you might hear us talk about it. I'm sure it's going to come up in our end of year review. At
least for a while anyway. You got a couple of months off, I reckon.
yeah, for sure.
How's the Golden Ale gone down?
It's all right. There's a strange finish that I'm getting on it. I can't quite put my finger on. It tastes a little bit like it's unfinished. It's enjoyable enough, but certainly as it's warming, it's becoming a bit more of a challenge to drink.
It's not as clean as the lager. It was an exceptionally clean lager that we had to start off with. And so this did have the little bit of competition to go up against anyway. I think it's definitely one of those beers that you wouldn't want it to warm up too much. My initial feeling is pretty good, still pretty favourable. It's still streets ahead of what used to be out there in the past. And yeah, I do like the branding on the cans as well.
Yeah, the branding is very very clear, which I think will continue over as we move into our third beer this week, which is once again from Athletic Brewing Co. And this time it's their Run Wild alcohol-free IPA, which has, again, the very simple but rather distinctive branding on it.
Yeah, so slightly different background picture. The first one is sort of sun over a mountain range, and this one's almost got like a long and winding road into the distance. So, I think it's definitely showing what it's about beers you can enjoy while you're doing outdoor activities is what I'm getting from it. Now, we've both had this before, Steve.
We have, yes.
We'll discuss that in a second. So
yeah,
let's dive in. Cheers.
That's got a very dank nose on it.
It's quite surprising how much of a nose it has got. Although I'm probably saying that because it's 0.4%, but it's brewed with a blend of Northwest hops with Citra Mosaic at the forefront, Premium organic malts from the US and Germany. Subtle yet complex malt profile is the description of the beer. And that's pretty accurate, to be honest. I think it's a very pleasant aroma. And again, it's a very nice tasting, essentially session IPA, or as they say, the ultimate sessionable IPA. Now, I had this last Wednesday after I took advantage of the fact that the Wednesday evening was remarkably warm and sunny, and I thought, I'm going to be many more of these left this year. So out on the bike I went, got back home, and I did do a can of this because I had one in the fridge already, and probably did it in about 3 gulps. It did exactly what I needed to do post bike ride. When did you have yours?
A few days before, after a ride as well. I thought, well, I'm gonna put these beers to the test, and I'm going to see if they can be enjoyed after exercise. And yeah, actually, in terms of it being cold, fizzy, and refreshing, which is generally some of the things you're looking for when you've been out on a run or a ride, and you know you're thirsty when you get back because you've been working. It certainly ticked all of those boxes for me.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it's a nice alternative. Sometimes if you've been out on the bike, you've already consumed a decent amount of water, and you just need something different, don't you? And either you might not be a fizzy pop drinker, or you might not like it, or you may not want the calories that comes with it as well, and the sugar. So this did a very good job for me and sort of cut through it after. I knew I was still thirsty, but I just couldn't face any more water at the time as well. But yeah, look at us doing our sciencey research, Steve.
Well, while we are enjoying the Run Wild alcohol-free IPA, let's get into this week's question.
Opinions, 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 opinions.
Which was, should drinking a beer ever be a struggle? And I think I might have chosen this poll this week in case the alcohol-free beers were a struggle. I think I was probably thinking back to that very first alcohol-free show that we did. But we had 262 votes on this one, 77.9% of people going for what, never, and 22.1% of people saying, yeah, maybe.
From your boy, Rob Edwards. Should a beer be designed to be a struggle to drink? Nope, not unless it's a stunt. Here for the beer at Ox Beer Hunter. A struggle for one person could be a delight for another. Then from Chicken Dipper at Graham Solander. I'd accept a challenge, but never a struggle.
From Dr. Goggles, if I'm struggling to finish a beer, I'll give up. It should be pleasurable. Some beers are just bad, and also we all like different things. No need to force down a drink you're not enjoying. From Points of Brew, no, if you're struggling, you're not enjoying it in my eyes. You're either struggling because you're not enjoying it or because you've had enough. From Hopagander, it's okay to not like a beer. It's even more okay to admit you don't like a beer and move on to the next. Said by a man who has struggled through countless beers.
From Graham Meakin, it should never be a struggle, but if you don't like a certain beer or style, you should definitely try it again a couple of years later. Taste change. For example, the first taste of a Rausch beer is generally a strange one for most people, but some people, like myself, grow to love it. From Andrew Sheldon at Tavare Fan Club, I always used to finish a beer on the grounds that if I paid for it, should I drink it? A chili porter finally altered my perspective.
From the Disappearing Chin at Disappearing Chin, took me a year to struggle through sours, and now I couldn't imagine a life without them now. And from Guy Miller at Brew Guy, yes, a struggle every time some fucker drinking pumpkin beers mentions and posts a picture of foul spawn. I see the love for pumpkin beers is starting early this year.
It's definitely divisive, that one, isn't it? From James at Gamma Baron, I've struggled with sour beers in the past, so tended to avoid them like the plague. But with Thornbridge Beer Club and getting hold of some US Wild Ale, I've learned to appreciate them now. White chocolate stouts can still get in the sea, though. From James Keatley at J Keatley 1892. Why does nobody sell tippers and 330 milliliter cans? I rarely ever sit there thinking, I really want 440 milliliters of a tipper. If you're not sharing, I find it all a bit pointless.
From Martin Griffin at Martin the Monkey. Said never, as others have said, would rather tippers and impies come in smaller cans, so I struggle with the serving measure rather than the beer itself, which I would argue is a separate point. And then finally from Bay Beer Reviews, remember that first time you drank a beer, any beer? Now that was a struggle. Some great comments there this week, and there's before we get into our views, there's a couple of points I just want to pick up on there. So I just want to go back into some of these comments, particularly the one around, and it's one that comes up time and time again, isn't it? The size of cans and the ABV of beers in bigger cans.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with it. I mean, joking aside, we have both now tried the Abbeydale Deliverance 440s cans, 8+%. You could argue that is better suited to a 330 can, especially if you're want to have a couple on your own. But yeah, when we start talking into some of the really big beers, then yes, unless you have got access to people to share with, or a partner perhaps who wants to share beers with you, then that you can, because sometimes I've got 2/3 of the way through a beer and it's a big beer and I'm thinking, I've opened it now. There's no way I can sort of keep it. So don't get me wrong, I know why. I get the logistics, the same reason why certain companies seem to only have one size of box, regardless of the things they're delivering to you. So I get it from a cost perspective, but from my point of view, I would, if I had to, I'd err on the side of like 250 milliliters for those 10% plus beers, because I think the Courage Imperial Stout that you referenced earlier, Steve, I think that's 275. I want to say.
I will find out when I dig it out of my cellar to drink.
I think that's. I don't think it's a 330. I think it's smaller than that, and I think it's a wonderful size for that beer. If you are sharing, you can just split two of them, or someone can have a little taste of them before they decide. You haven't opened so much of it in one go. So yeah, I think that will come up for a lot of people all the time. It's probably a bit of a preventer from people buying it sometimes.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think, you know, we have had this discussion a number of times, particularly I know during the lockdown shows last year. There were a lot of people saying that obviously with the prevalence of the amount of beers that people started ordering to drink at home, you didn't necessarily want to find yourself sat there on a weekday night drinking a 440 ml can of a 12% Imperial Stout.
I would argue that there's a lot of beers that I would prefer not to have 440s. I mean, the thing is, it's also a volume, isn't it? I mean, say you do want to have a little bit of a mini session, but maybe you're doing it on your own. There's a lot less beers variety you can get through if you're drinking 440s, unless you really are going to hammer it. Whereas generally, I would 330, and also 330 stack better in fridges, on shelves, in fridge doors, in cupboards. And if there's anything wrong with the beer and it decides to go pop, there's less liquid coming out as well. So, and there's lots of good reasons to have big beers in smaller cans.
Yeah, completely agree.
What was your overall view? If you were reading this question, how would you have taken the word struggle? Because I think Point to Brew made quite a good point. Is it you who's had enough beer? So like you say, you could have gone to the Vic on the Friday and gone, I'm going there because I said I will, but actually I don't need a beer today. I don't want a beer, and it might be a struggle. Or were you viewing that question as a struggle, as in challenging?
I think I was viewing it as I'm not enjoying this beer, so why should I struggle to finish it? More so than this is a bad beer, I'm going to struggle to drink it, sort of thing. I think it was purely for me. I suppose in terms of, I guess, writing that question, my thought process at the time was, if I'm struggling with a beer, what is it I'm struggling with? Is it the style that I'm struggling with? Is it something to do with taste or flavor, or is it a bad beer? So, and I very rarely like to drain pour beers. In fact, I will 9 times out of 10 I will generally struggle through a beer rather than feel like I'm wasting it. But there are times where you simply try a beer and you're like, nah, I'm gonna struggle to get through that, and therefore I'm not gonna force myself to drink it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely used to be of a mind. If I've paid for it, I don't want to chuck it. But I'm now at that point where, yeah, but I don't want to feel bad later on in the evening or the next day. Because generally it is when I think the beer is bad rather than a style I don't like. Like I said, I did like the points of Brew Point. The reason for struggling is that you've done, you said you're going to drink for 3 days, and then by day 3 you probably shouldn't be. It's probably a struggle, but you're doing it anyway. But no, I think beers can be challenging, and I think the other point that was made on there from Graham about Rausch beers, you definitely didn't have much of the Belgian-y in you early doors, and you're probably more adventurous with those kind of beers now, Steve. Over time, many bottle shares where Belgian beers kept on featuring, and then trip to Belgium, that kind of thing. So I think our palates and our tastes can change. I know that when I host the work beer tastings, the beers I think are sessionable, or maybe not sessionable but pintable. There are definitely people at that tasting who think this is the worst beer ever that someone has presented to them, just because it is so different, so out of the box to what they're used to seeing and used to having. So I think you can actually paint that picture in quite a few different areas. And for someone who only drinks Guinness, is their only dark beer, then you can almost present any other dark beer, and then potentially that beer could be a struggle, because Guinness sort of stands on its own, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I thought it was an interesting question. I know it was quite low on the votes, but I think the comments were very good.
Yeah, I think there was a good level of engagement on the comments, and particularly on James Keatley's comment, who I think he was the first one to mention about the size of cans again. That particular reply, there was a lot of discussion that then came off of his reply that others then got involved in, and that's why it's great to see with these polls, because obviously that's what we try to. Yes, we use them as content for the show, but we do also like to see it generate a little bit of friendly debate on Twitter on a Sunday evening. But you can continue to get involved in this week's poll. Use the hashtag Hopinions, and you may very well find yourself in this next part of the show.
Let us know, write it down. Let us know, write it down. Let us know your thoughts and bitter and lingerness. Write it down.
So first up from Wayne at the Irish Beer Snob, who's been on a listen through of recent shows, starting with episode 153 and the wonderfully eloquent Danny, who spoke with passion and clarity about hospitality. Also very envious of the beers they were drinking. Next up was 154 with Matt, who was a great guest. Can't believe it had been so long since he was last on. The special that dropped with Jezza with the wedding owls was great. Definitely have aged by accident with mixed results. You could almost hear the apprehension and the palatable relief when the beer was pleasant. And just starting the Northern Irish special with Stephen, lots of similarities between North and South with licenses. So Wayne is on a bit of a catch up there to keep up with the shows that we're putting out. And then next up from Stephen O'Kane at Socrates 9, favourite rant might be over the price of a half pint. And I still disagree with you on it, although the difference shouldn't be more than 10 or 20p. I think Martin had the biggest rant about it.
Yeah, don't get me started, Stephen. We don't want him kicking off again about that.
It should still just be half the price.
Yes. From Johnny Beer Boy. Just finished listening to this at work and thoroughly enjoyed the conversation on a super interesting topic. Would definitely be grabbing Johnny's book on payday, not to mention the absolute super band aspect of having CBC and Beer O'Clock Show opinions combined. Listen to the latest show with Johnny on the way home, talking about seasonality in beer, and now I just want a brown ale or a barley wine from Wee Beer Shop.
From Point to Brew, cracking episode as normal. We'll be buying the book once I've cleared my backlog. All that's left to say is long live Sabro. And then from Rasco and Disco Beer Reviews, really enjoyed this. Not sure what they've got against coconut, but it's a bloody great listen. And then the flip side of that from Steve Longdon, totally agree on the use of coconut in beer. I just wanted to go back to Rasco and Disco there and say coconut has no place in beer. I will repeat what I said on that show. Coconut belongs in its shell, on a tree, or on the beach. Nowhere near my beer.
And there endeth the lesson from Steve. From Ian Hay, this is another excellent episode. Some very thought-provoking angles from Johnny, whose book I should have had to buy. Cheers, guys. Pete at Hops and Hoops. I've just remembered something from a dark time called March 2020. I was very gloomy, focusing hugely on all the COVID doom, and it was making me feel real bad. Martin and Steve helped me get out of it. Thanks for that, Pete.
Yeah, I was quite humbled by that comment.
Yeah.
I'm glad you appreciated what we did, Pete. We certainly I've said it many times. It helped keep me going as well during that time that I had something to focus on every week.
Yeah, and as ever, thanks for all the bitter and linguist comments.
Yeah, just always keep them coming. Use that hashtag opinions. We've also got a couple of questions from listeners this week.
Questions fill my head.
First up from Rob Zilla at Rob Many Handles. Random question from the last podcast. Rather than expecting people to upload to YouTube, which could clean house, why is there no independent beer archive to protect heritage and make available content from podcasts, videos, blogs, etc. for research? Now, this is a really interesting question, and there's a couple of points I think with this question. So this was obviously on what we was talking about in the last show about how I'm currently going through the process of essentially archiving all of our content on YouTube, so it's available for people to listen to in the future once we bring an end to this and stop paying for domain names and all of that. So firstly, there's no expectation for me to do that. That's a choice that I've decided to do because I want the content to remain available in the future. I want it to still be there in a way that with some of the older beer podcasts that came before us isn't now. Secondly, I think the reason why there's no independent beer archive is probably because it's simply too soon in terms of the different types of technology that people are using to talk about beer. It's early on in those days. I mean, there are kind of archives for brewery information and labels and all that sort of thing. There are historical archives, but I think we're maybe a few years away from collecting any of the technological stuff. And I think also a lot of the digital output that's being created now could be viewed as being people's professions rather than hobbies. So it should be down to the individuals to find a way to create their own legacy.
I think I'd agree with that. I mean, I like the question from Rob. Unless there was an organisation that we all belong to, which would probably be funded. And I know you may argue the British Guild of Beer Writers, but that's very much a organisation that doesn't, there's a lot of podcasters who aren't part of that, or bloggers or vloggers. So I would also say that, yes, you're probably right, Steve. It's probably down to ourselves, the people who own the material. And lastly, we're pretty much in a throwaway society. People listen, you download it, you listen, you delete. That's the society we operate in. I have once or twice often thought that when you've referred to some of the older podcasts that even predated you and Mark, I wouldn't have minded dipping into those just to listen to what people were saying at the time, in the 2010s. But that you say that's not really available to me. Equally, it's only occasionally I've wanted to go back to it. So it would be wonderful to have the archive. And let's face it, the technology is there for at least individuals to archive their material if they've got the wherewithal and decide to do it. So at least the options are there, but you never know. As you say, maybe once this becomes a much more mature place, maybe someone might take that mantle up and create a digital archive, which would be a nice resource for people to have in the future.
I think that also comes down to probably to need as well. Quite simply, there isn't the need for it at the moment. I'm as I said, I'm purely doing it so that we've got a record of the Beer O'Clock show and what we did. And at the moment, that won't be made public until a time at which we finish doing this. Because I'm the only subscriber to the channel at the moment, and when I have a couple of hours of uploading, my YouTube playlists are just full of new content from the Beer O'Clock show, and I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody, that you've suddenly got all this content appear. So that it's probably out there if you want to find it, but people that have been with us for a while, it's nothing new. It's literally content that you've heard in a different format, and the day that we'll make the location of that available will be the day that we finish doing this and close down the Beer O'Clock show website,
which isn't any time on the horizon yet. Just one question from me, Steve. Any Easter eggs in the upload so far? Have you done any Marvel shit on us?
What you mean, like added content to No, I've got no desire to. Believe me, the process is time consuming enough without having to go back into some of those shows and add in content.
I can just imagine you thinking, someone say we should have had this as the outro track and then changing it or something like that. Or maybe one of our numerous gaffes and outtakes suddenly finding their way in there.
Yeah, if anything, what we might have is some problems with some of the outro tracks and copyright claims on them, because YouTube are very hot on that, very hot on you using other people's music, and if you use too much of it, they will put a copyright claim on your video. It does give you the option to remove the music. The video will automatically clip the music out of it. But we've only had a couple so far, but they haven't ventured across the line where they want us to do something about it.
Okay, that's good then. That's good. Anyway, I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing for us, Steve. So thank you very much for doing it.
Oh, you're very welcome, mate. And then the other question this week is from James at Gammon Baron. Now we are being allowed back into music venues, which have the best beer selection now? Put this in this week's show because I can't answer that. I don't go to enough gigs to be able to even get anywhere near answering that. But I know lots of our listeners go to lots of venues to enjoy live music. So let's have suggestions from you folks. Let us and let James know where is the best beer in music venues across the UK. Use the hashtag Hopinions.
I mean, I would just venture to say the bigger the venue, the worse the selection is my personal experience. And generally, your local pub with a couple of people singing or playing guitar, you probably will still have your usual beer selection available to you, but it probably only holds about 15 people watching said band. So that would be my option.
Had I not been in Southwold on Sunday evening, I probably could have gone to the Vic for some live music and enjoyed it with a pint of Red Danson.
There you go. That's what I had in mind. Is a pub which does music once a week or maybe once a month only. it's a pub that you already like the beer selection at, and the beer selection probably doesn't change because it's got music on. You know what it's like. Get you as soon as you start stepping up into officially licensed, not officially licensed, but venues that are purely there for music, the selection gets worse and more expensive in my own personal experience anyway. But really look forward to hearing if you are convinced. There's a few people in my head who I'm expecting prompt replies from.
Yes, yeah, and if you do want to tag James in directly to that, it's at Gammon Baron, or you can let us know and we'll feature it on next show. While we've been talking about that, the Athletic Brewing Co. Run Wild alcohol-free IPA has been going down very, very easily in the glass. Martin, what are your final thoughts on this beer, mate?
Really enjoyed it. I was able to give a bit more time and thought this time than the first time I had it. And yeah, it's really good. Definitely, it holds all of its characteristics all the way through. And unlike the Golden Ale, doesn't start to change a little bit as it warms up. I would definitely go back to that one. I don't know. I mean, how readily, I know that they say it's they've got an arm in the UK. I mean, and I think they had a stall at Brew London. Possibly, I seem to have got quite a few low and no that day. But hopefully it's fairly easy for people to get hold of. So if they are interested, and let us know what they think. But again, it's another option. It's giving you options in this market, and it seems to be that the low and no is just continually seeing growth year on year.
Couple of things there. Firstly, if you go on to the Athletic Brewing Co. website, it will take you to the UK landing page for it, so you can buy the beers directly from them if you're interested in these beers. And I know that we've got a number of listeners that are very much into keeping active and keeping healthy and fit, and I know I've seen a few of those listeners try these beers as well. So yeah, I'd be keen to hear other people's thoughts on them. But if we go back to what we referenced at the beginning of the show, in terms of when we first did alcohol-free beers 5 years ago, the selection was fairly tiny in terms of what you could get hold of. And that very first show that we did, I think it was only the second or third Hopinions podcast that we had done together. You outrightly promised to leave if we ever did alcohol-free again. We have since done a follow-up alcohol-free show, which was a couple of years ago, where we spoke about how far alcohol-free beers had come. And obviously on that show, I think we featured one of the Thornbridge releases and the Ghost Ship 0.5 as well, which I still think is probably, in terms of an example of an alcohol-free beer that is pretty damn close to tasting like beer. The Ghost Ship 0.5 is still up there.
Yep.
But then you look at what we've tried here today. We've tried two beers that are very, very focused on their nutritional content and that side of things. And we've tried a lager that was just a really good lager. But all of these beers are considered alcohol-free because they're 0.5 or under. 5 years isn't a huge amount of time to have come so far with alcohol-free beer, is it?
No, but I suppose in beer terms, you know, from 2012 to 2017, the type of beers you would have started drinking, you were drinking with Mark early doors, to what we started drinking in the first year of Opinions, it was quite a great leap. So I suppose in terms of that, the evolution has been in a fairly similar sort of pattern. It's just that perhaps we didn't predict it would happen quite as sharply as that. I mean, and there are loads out there. There are enough new alcohol-free beers from breweries who specialise in it to do a much more regular alcohol-free update if we were of a mind to, because there are so many out there. I really enjoyed trying the beers from Sheep in Wolves Clothing and the ones from Athletic. And yeah, if anyone else has got any thoughts about them, please, again, use the hashtag Opinions, let us know.
Yep, and we'll just reiterate again, we are very grateful to both those breweries for sending us beers to try. It's always nice to try something new and to revisit a theme again. I'm wondering how long it'll be before we do a fourth alcohol-free show.
I suspect it will happen at some point, Steve.
Yeah, they do seem to be becoming more regular now. That's for sure. Certainly, though, won't be on the next show. What have we got coming up on the next show, Martin?
We're going to be joined by Katie from Nomadic Brewing to chat to us about a whole host of things, but especially including brewing fresh hop beers. So really looking forward to that. I've never had a chance. I've never met Katie, and I've had very little of the Nomadic Brewing range. So that should be a really interesting conversation. I know that there are some fans of Nomadic beers who are listeners as well.
Yep, very cask-forward, cask-led brewery, but also the whole discussion around fresh hop beers. I know something that's been on Twitter quite a bit recently, people discussing those. So it will be interesting to have that discussion with Katie and talk to her about all things Nomadic. All that's left to be said this week is cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.